My great grandfather, Lewis White, was a prolific high school baseball player here in the city of St. Paul, my birth city and hometown neighborhood I grew up in St. Paul, Minnesota, our capital. Um, he was a prolific baseball player in high school. He still holds the batting average for a single season in St. Paul public schools. I think he batted 700 or 730 his senior year, which is just astronomical. He put the bat on the ball. He put the ball in play. He was a very good baseball player, and he was also invited to a number of times. He was invited to participate with the Barnstormers. If you know anything about the Barnstormers, there were these barnstorm leagues all across the country where black folks played baseball because they weren't allowed at regular facilities, parks, and they obviously the MLB had its own league, so the Negro League kind of had a barnstorm affiliation. My grandfather was so good, in fact, he had opportunities to play in the Negro Leagues and pursue professional baseball, but chose not to because he had my grandfather, Frank White, who is a Hall of Fame referee in the state of Minnesota, served on the Minnesota high school board, and is a longtime fixture here in the community. A lot of people know my grandfather and respect my grandfather. He and I have a difference of opinion on politics. He's somebody who I think has read into the headlines around Donald Trump and the MAGA movement versus diving into the details about the policy. However, his father was a Republican, and I framed the story to help shape um, something I talked about yesterday or last night on on the Royce White radio show on the John Fredericks radio network, and I just talked about how I play the music I play on the radio, which comes a lot from the '70s and what they call the oldies, the soul music, James Brown and Marvin Gaye and Al Green and Aretha Franklin and even the Bee Gees and Sinatra and all these older musicians, this older music that had a sort of quality to it that we've just seemed to lose. And then I talked about how the process of making music from a technological standpoint probably had some unintended consequences of losing that quality of sound. Certainly that quality of musicianship and sort of craftsmanship. You used to record a song on one track and you had to be so good that you could record the whole song all the way through. Now you can play it in parts and make it sound like it's one cohesive song. Um, Not to get off topic, but what I'm saying and what I was saying last night is that the advancement of technology itself and industrialization has had unintended consequences. And part of those unintended consequences, especially when looking at a situation like my great grandfather and my grandfather, there was a character of men that was just lost, that was lost by I don't know, the structure of cities or the way that jobs were created, the way that jobs worked in the market, the way that people transported or got to and from, the way that people got their information, and hence me and my grandfather have a great difference of opinion in politics, and me and my great grandfather would have saw things much more eye to eye. He was a Republican, and now look, my grandfather was the oldest of his brothers and sisters, seven brothers and sisters, and that kind of tells you the difference of the way families were the way families were built back then versus today. We have a real shortage of children, and you know, um, births, especially in the black community. Uh, Partly and due to Margaret Sanger and Planned Parenthood, but partly due to this sort of material and technological craze that says you should be more worried about your own life and your own happiness, right, than you are the servitude and the duty of procreation and having a child and raising that child up the right way to be a productive member of society, like they're hopefully trying to do for young Jeremiah Wright here. Although Joe Biden and his administration and the rest of the puppet masters behind him are getting in the way for that young man and many others across the country. But my grandfather had my great grandfather had my grandfather. My great grandfather Lewis White had my grandfather Frank White, and it stopped him from pursuing his baseball passions because his mother and father told him that if you had a child, you need to stay there and work and take care of that child and be with that woman and help raise that family. And that was just the standard then. And so my grandfather, as great of a baseball player as he was, certainly talented enough and skilled enough to participate and pursue professional dreams, decided to just start working. And I remember my grandfather. Sorry, my great grandfather was the patriarch of our family until I was about 13 years old. He died of cancer, and it was a devastating blow to the family. I remember as a young child just the closeness of my extended family before he passed, and then the sort of chaos and inter family feuds and bickering and things that went on after he passed, and it was night and day. He really held the family together in many ways, and my grandfather used to come and pick me up, and he would take me to go see my great grandfather, who lived in the same house in the heart of the Rondo and Frogtown community, right there on Thomas. It's about a stone's throw from the Capitol. Not really. It's about 7 blocks, 8 blocks, or something like that. About a mile from the state's capital. But it was a neighborhood that over the years, got a little bit more dangerous, more crime, more drugs, as many black neighborhoods saw. Many affluent black neighborhoods, which Rondo in St. Paul, Minnesota was. You can read about that. But he stayed in that community. And I used to come and I would come into his house, tiny little modest house. Um, and he'd have baseball on in the living room. And he'd be in the kitchen. And he'd be coming to and from the backyard where he had his own garden. He jarred his own pickles. He jarred his own peppers. He tended to his own garden. And now remember, this is the inner city. I mean, these are the type of men. This is the sacred honor that was infused in me without me even realizing it until I fully understood what was being done to American citizens and American citizenship and the black community, but all Americans. And now I can see so clearly that my great grandfather was the epitome of a man trying to maintain sacred honor in a world around him that was trying to rip it from his grasp. I mean, imagine having your own garden in a little tiny single family home, that couldn't have been, that was maybe 2.5 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, right? I mean, it's just a little tiny, I can still see the front of it in my mind right now. It's just a little tiny modest homes like many of the Americans across this country. But he had a garden in the back. Okay. I mean, this is the sense of American citizenship and the nation of shopkeepers and the agrarian, rugged individualists that we've lost. And I point that out. I'd come into the house and I'd hug my great grandfather and he'd be smoking a cigarette. He went to the bar every day in his community, right there, the little watering hole, and he did that until the day he died. Um, and he was always very even keeled, very loving, very wise. Um, Never really saw him get upset. A few times I did, and those were rare moments. But he was a great man. He was a great man, and we've lost a lot of that. Is my point. We've lost a lot of that in our black communities. Men like Lewis White, and it saddens me